Welcome to Beyond Surviving, the safe space for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to receive support, resources, and share their stories. Beyond Surviving is about freedom, healing, connection, and even laughter and fun. Most importantly, it's about letting go of the pain of abuse and finally moving on. I'm Rachel Grant, and for those of you who don't yet know me, I've been a sexual abuse recovery coach since 2007, and am the author of Beyond Surviving, the final stage of recovery from sexual abuse. I work with survivors who are sick and tired of feeling broken and unfixable, and I help them break free of the pain and finally feel normal. You can learn more about me and the Beyond Surviving program at rachelgrantcoaching.com. So, folks, I'm so excited to have here with me my guest today, Marilee McLean, who is going to be sharing with us about her journey navigating the court system, and is also going to talk with us about the sad fact that, of course, thousands of good, loving moms are losing their children to abusers because of the way our court systems are structured right now. So I want to tell you a little bit more about her before we dive into our conversation. So this is a powerhouse woman. She is an advocate, a protective parent, a domestic violence expert, a professional speaker, and also the author of Prosecuted But Not Silenced: Courtroom Reform for Sexually Abused Children. Marilee has written several articles for the ABA Child Law Journal, Women's News, and other publications on the problems of family courts not protecting abused children. Marilee is with Women's Media Center, She Source Expert, the National Partnership to End Interpersonal Violence. She's also with APB American Program Bureau, Inc., and RAIN Speaker Bureau. So she is tied in to so many wonderful organizations and resources and communities, and really bringing her message very broadly into all of these different spaces. She presents at conferences, law schools, and is a spokesperson for Protective Mothers. Her passion for advocacy developed through living a mother's worst nightmare, and we're going to hear more about that, and you can certainly know more of her story and read her story in her book. Really, she was launched into fighting this system that is set up with everything she had, and as a result of that, gained insight that this was really not her nightmare alone, that there are so many other mothers going through this same thing. She organized a national rally of mothers at the Colorado State Capitol and has been involved in legislative work that spans over 2 decades. She testified before Congress to promote judicial accountability to better protect sexually abused children's rights in our courts. Marilee's story has been covered by many media outlets and internationally on CNN. So, Marilee, it is with deep and wonderful pleasure that I have you here with us today. Thank you so much for taking some time to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you, Rachel, and all the work that you do. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. So I want to start off. When I met you and found out about what you were up to and that you had published this book, I immediately downloaded it, got it on my Kindle, and set to reading. And the very first night that I started your book, I often start reading right before bed, so I started reading around 9 o'clock. And the next thing I know, I looked over at the clock and it was 3 a.m. And I was like, whoa, because it was just one page after another of, oh my gosh, no, what? That can't, huh? And waiting for a moment of relief and a moment of, okay, things are going to be okay now. And just going on that journey through the pain and this. And you start off, I want to read something from your book that just to kind of set the stage for our conversation today and for our listeners. Some that right in early on in the book that you said, I'm telling you our story because I want to change a judicial system that is detrimental to sexually abused children. I write this book with the best interest of the child in mind and to acknowledge the pain that is inflicted upon families by our inept and biased judicial system, a system designed to fail the child and protect the abuser. There is an unequivocal need for courtroom reform and more adequate training for judges, lawyers, therapists, social workers, and court-appointed evaluators. So this was really impactful for me to just read from the very beginning because it wasn't something that I had really had my eye very closely on, myself not having gone through any of this in my own journey, and not with many of my clients to date as well. And so the first kind of thing that comes to mind is, years later now, you're still involved in helping to educate and change what's happening in our courts and to children. So I'd love to know more about, what spurs you on, and also anything that you've noticed that is the same or anything that you've noticed has shifted since you published your book.
Well, I'd like to say that it's all shifted and it's changed and it's moved in the right direction, but I can't say so. I got involved, obviously, like you said, many years ago, believing that the system would change and that we could enlighten what was happening, because there's so many of these cases, and there literally are thousands of these cases. I get calls from women from every state every day of my life with almost identical cases to what I went through and what these other mothers are going through, just trying to protect their children. And these are good, loving women and mothers that are not a drug addict or an alcoholic or, anything wrong with them other than mother love, just trying to do the right thing and protect their child. So, and it's not just here in the U.S., it is international as well. I'd say more so here in the U.S., but it is international as well. So I've spent many years, 2 decades, and that's over 2 decades. And why I do now is because of not necessarily my daughter and I now. My goal it came from that, obviously, but it's to make a difference, to wake up society to what's going on, just like even you, Rachel, that are in the middle of all this and have lived this, to not really know how much this is going on. And our media is not picking it up. It's like they may have picked it up with my case, the CNN International News, but these other cases are not getting picked up. It's just like not happening. And we need to get it out to the public and make this a huge media. It's really a health issue. It's a national health crisis because we're not looking at this issue. And I know you understand that part of it. And maybe the listeners don't, and we'll get to that later, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's a great point, and it is, I can only imagine the endurance that it's taken you to stay in this fight when you see maybe little shifts here or there, but the need so far outweighs the resources and the awareness. I absolutely agree with what you said, that our media and our government and our systems are just not really taking this as seriously as it really needs to be, because given the epidemic that child abuse is and the long-term effects that it has, it is a social, it's a social issue. It's not an individual person's issue. It affects our communities. It affects our population as a whole. It affects health and income and finances and, crime. I mean, there's just the trickle-down effects are so very broad. So I'm thankful that we have people like yourself who are staying in it and continuing to push for reform and bring about more and more legislation that protects both children and the parent who is trying to protect them.
Yeah, and Rachel, I think too, I just thought of something as you were saying that. And I'd have to say it was probably over 20 years ago. It was 1994 to be exact. It was the year that VAWA Act was passed, and I had a rally at the Capitol, and this attorney who was very big in these cases and understood this and was a domestic violence survivor herself, got on the Capitol steps, and I'll never forget the words she said. And this is what is so shocking to me. She said it took them 20 years to listen to domestic violence, and we do not have another 20 years for them to listen to this issue. She
Yeah.
said, this is like the Civil Rights Act of the 60s. This is the movement of the 90s. And then she said, at first we were just going to take a list of mothers at her center that she had in New Jersey for domestic violence, because most of these cases are domestic violence cases that move into the abuse of the children. She said, but today we're taking a different list, and that list is going to be a list of judges. And the first judge on that list is going to be Judge Michael Beta, who has sentenced Marilee McLean's child to a lifetime of abuse. And her fist goes in the air. And this is for you, Amy. And, you know, that was the start of all this. I was gasping when we had the at the Civic Center here in Colorado, the rally for Women's March. And I really felt the Women's March was all kinds of issues, not just on Trump. I mean, it was all women's issues. And I looked over at the Capitol steps and was reminiscing that day at the Capitol and thinking, where have we come? And all this, where have we really come? Because society really needs to take a look at this. This could be your niece. It can be your aunt. It could be your sister, your mother, your daughter. I don't care who. But it is going to affect you. And just like when they don't want to look at survivors, all those, and how many survivors we have, this is another part of it that they don't want to look at. But it is affecting all of us. That's like what you said, the drug addiction, the alcoholism, the PTSD, the heart disease, cancer. It all affects all of us. So if our society can't take a look at what's happening, and then our courts aren't doing the right thing by these children and their moms that are trying to protect them, you know, where are we in society when we can't look at this issue?
Yeah, I hear you. Why do you think that that this topic still remains in the shadows in some ways? Why mainstream media isn't doing more to pick up and bring about awareness? Why legislation still is so archaic in so many ways and not up to date and not up to speed with, you know, really where we're at? Do you have any thoughts as to why that is?
Well, you know, I mean, I've studied this for a long time, and everybody has their own opinions on it. I'm just going to give you kind of what gets out there is it's a gender bias issue, which I do believe it is. And then some women will think, well, it's paternal control. You know, the fact that men had the control of their women and their babies, you know, forever. And then it's kind of the pendulum swings back the other way and women start getting their kids when they were stay-at-home moms. But that's not happening today. And then other women will say, other mothers that are fighting, this is the father's rights, you know, funding, which is, we're talking millions and millions, even more than that it's going into funding father's rights, federal government funding. Well, you don't see these mothers getting any federal funding. And there's all issues to this, but to me, I look back and I think, oh, when I was going through it, I felt like it was like the Salem witch hunt because you are so attacked by the system. It's not just men attacking you because a lot of these women judges are doing this. So we've got a bigger picture here to really look at. And why do we want to keep this under wraps? A lot of it's education. It is. I mean, these judges, I just went to Colorado to talk to the head of the family court system, the management of it for the training. So it's all Colorado where they do training for judges. And I wanted to get in to be able to do some of this training. Now, I'm somebody on the outside. I'm not a judge and I'm not an attorney, but I have a lot of education on this area, and I wanted to help train them on, the adverse childhood reaction. There's evidence, all that, ACE study, not just the ACE study, but on what's happening in the courts and show them these cases that are coming through the court system where these are good, loving mothers that have evidence their child's being sexually abused and what our courts are doing. So an education process in that area. And they said to me that judges only have to do 5 hours of training a year, and they can pick where those hours are. Well, if you're a judge in a domestic violence district, I mean, that's all the cases that you get are a lot of domestic violence cases, family law cases, then you should be mandatory having to take training, and not just from another judge who doesn't really understand this issue. And I'm not saying all judges don't understand this issue, and I'm not putting anything into an all or not category, but what I'm saying is they don't understand the fact of domestic violence in these cases and how these women come in, they've pretty much lost everything, and they're trying to fight for their child, and they're up against possibly a psychopath, sociopath, narcissist. I mean, these men that commit this kind of a crime aren't just your everyday guy next door. These guys are very manipulative. And so that woman may not come across as well as that psychopath or sociopath or narcissist may. But judges don't even understand the dynamics that are going on in that courtroom. Secondly, it's a myth to believe that women make up false allegations, because the stats will show and prove, which was done by the Judicial Commission, that it is 1.3% of women would make a false allegation. 1.3, that's next to none. Yeah. No woman that loves her children is going to put herself through this. This is a nightmare, or their child through that, you know. So most of these cases are contested custody cases, where they're, you know, usually when a parent and a couple get divorced or whatever, they really want to do what's right by that child. So they want the child maybe 50-50, or they want to make sure it goes in a good way for the child. But when it's a contested custody case, those cases are usually abuse cases. This is about control. Mm-hmm. This is about manipulation and to control that woman and control that child. It's all about control and power. Yeah. And when our system doesn't understand that and aren't trained in that, they don't get it. And it totally goes over their head. Plus, most of our courts, our family courts, are not evidentiary hearings. They don't bring out the evidence like a criminal court would. So if you were raped, which I know, or whatever's out there in the public, I'm not going into, family abuse or anything like that. Just say we were raped, and a child is raped, but it's the father. It goes into family court. Mm-hmm. Most abuse is happening within the families, as we well know. It's not the boogeyman behind the bush, hiding behind the bush. It is within your family. And if family courts aren't going to take in the evidence and it doesn't go to criminal court, they're not prosecuting. They don't even look at the evidence. Most of these women, do not have their First Amendment rights. You have really no civil rights in there, or your human rights are denied for both the child and the mother. No due process is happening when they're throwing out police reports and doctor's reports and not looking at the evidence. What do you call that? That was in criminal court. They'd have to look at that stuff. The problem with criminal court is it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And a lot of these cases won't have physical evidence. And even when they, so it's difficult. But my gosh, that's better than going into family court and prosecuting the mother and giving the child to the abuser. And that's what's happening.
Right. My goodness. Thank you so much. There's so many pieces of what you just shared there that are aha moments for me and like, oh my gosh moments. And, first of all, just to reiterate what you said about the training, the real lack of training that people who are in charge of making these decisions, don't have. In some ways, it's totally scary. It's totally scary. And, I that parallels a little bit even the training that a lot of counselors and therapists receive.
Absolutely.
This similar thing where it's like a weekend, training, or it's a one class to cover all types of abuse. Like, how are people really going to be fully equipped, to address this particular trauma? And so the fact that there's that lack of education and lack of resourcing, the other thing I really liked about what you said there was that they also are not reaching outside of their inner circles to get this training or to get this understanding. And so there's a high likelihood that they're getting bad information or not, a full, kind of rounded education about all of this. I think.
Well, and one more thing I want to interject there is there's a report that was done by Dr. Dan Sanders, and it was with the Justice Office, and it is on this very fact. It's research. It's not just a report. It's huge research on judges, therapists, evaluators, all whether they're trained in this area. And he found them not to be trained in this area. He found that the best people to do the training for this would be an advocate that has been through domestic violence. Mm-hmm. Who better to train them than somebody that's been through it to give them the real insights to what goes on. So I think that is a great study that should be out there everywhere. So,
can you name the study again? The author?
Yeah, it's Dr. Dan Sanders, and it was done by the Justice Office. He was asked to do it, so it was a grant that they gave him to do it or whatever. And it's a research study on the training of judges and evaluators, like custody evaluators, on domestic violence and the lack of training that they really have. And that it pretty much points out what's going on, whether it's sexual abuse or whatever. They really do not have the correct training for this. And I can go more into that, but it's just a long process. So, but it is a good one.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marilee. You know, the other thing that you talked about there in that piece as far as beginning to try to wrap our heads around why things are happening the way they are in our court systems is this level of manipulation. You know, as I was reading your story and, you know, the time and time again, the people who were supposed to be advocating for Amy and protecting her were duped, essentially, and turned on their heads by the father. And, God, like that, for me, was one of the most difficult things. Exactly. Like, hold on, you're the ones who are supposed to be protecting.
I couldn't understand that either.
Yeah.
It was more or less. I didn't mean to interrupt, but
it's
okay. I get into that part of it because it still upsets me. But it's so shocking to me that somebody that's supposed to be trained in psychology or trained as a guardian ad litem for the child, lawyer for the child, or a social worker, I understand they don't understand the manipulation and the control on that. But what bothered me the most was, okay, I understand that they can manipulate and they can control in that way, but how could you not look at the safety of that child first and not listen to that child? That is just to me, I don't care, put everything else aside. My daughter was not somebody who didn't talk. My daughter told policemen, doctors, social workers, psychologists, and in detail that no child could come up with.
Yeah.
She had physical evidence of abuse, and we still ignore it. That, to me, will boggle my mind the rest of my life. But those so-called, I would call them so-called professionals, because that was not a professional handling these kind of cases. They totally weren't just taken in by him, but maybe by the myth, maybe by not wanting to believe it, or I don't know. I have never been able to wrap my head around how people can ignore this when it's that evident.
You know, and for me, as I was reading your story, I mean, there are so many layers that start to come in because, first of all, you're dealing with you personally, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, if any of my assumptions or assessments are not on point, but, like, my sense of it was, you know, there's this first layer of, like, I have to deal with the fact that I need to leave this relationship, right? Somebody who you were in love with, and you did care about, but it reaches that point where you go, whoa, like, this is not okay, this is not working. So you're going through that grieving and that loss and trying to get your life sorted again and get started again as a single parent. And then you find out that your child is being abused. So you have all of that now to be thinking about and figuring out. And then you go to the systems that are supposed to help you navigate that and protect your child, and they are traumatizing both you and her. And I'm like, what in the world? Like, this is, and, I think that I'd love to hear just a little bit about that layer for you, like the damage that you really see was caused to you and your daughter by the court system, let alone the abuse and all of that. But, we'll talk about that in a moment perhaps. But just from that experience, what do you notice for some of the impact of that on you and Amy?
Well, I have to say, I mean, I think that I can't speak for her, but I do. She has told me how much the trauma of all that was, but they kind of it'd be hard for me to explain that on this, but how the layers of all that of being kept from her mother and silenced and how that's affected her life, I can't even tell you how much. But as far as going through that divorce, I mean, I made up my mind to leave him while I was pregnant with her. He was horrific to me during my pregnancy, and I had to get out carefully. Now, this was before you ever really read about domestic violence or you had the warning signs that we have out there today. I mean, I didn't have blackened eyes. I was physically abused and emotionally abused, but I say the emotional abuse was worse than the physical abuse. Now, I mean, it was horrific, and so I think that getting out of that marriage, I had to get out real carefully, and somehow instinctively I knew that. So I did it very carefully, and honestly, I think I did it right because I wouldn't be here today. So I handled it very well, but I was going through a horrific divorce and a lot of manipulation going on behind the scenes. And then from there, things calming down, because that's what these guys do. They're high and lows, and you never know when they're going to go. And so at this point, things had started to mellow out, and I thought, I married this man because I thought he'd be a great father, and he loved kids, and I just thought he'll be the best dad, But I never dreamed anything like this. And once again, this was far removed from my life, and I grew up with a great, happy home life and wonderful family and wonderful parents. So it just never crossed my path. Mm-hmm. But when it did, it was like the ultimate of abuse, because I had just barely gotten out of my own relationship with him, and the sick stuff he was doing, to the fact now thinking things were going to be normal, and he was mellowed out. I thought it was a divorce, and he's mellowed out, finding out that he's raping my daughter, So that was like the ultimate. And then to go into the court system, believing in the court system. I grew up very naively, believing in the system and believing that the truth would prevail. And door after door slammed in my face and treated with disdain, I'd have to say. And yeah, it took its toll on me. Only reason I survived was I was never not going to get her home and get her safe. I was never, ever going to give up, and I didn't. And I believe that all mothers have to do that. I mean, I don't know that they can do, a lot of them don't make it. I have women that have gone to bed where they just go to bed and never get out of bed again because they're so depressed, or they've committed suicide, and they ran in the underground or ran out of the country, and they don't make it. The FBI brings them back. And I believe in staying in the system, even though it's horrific. But that's what I tell the moms that are going through this is, you got to stay in those supervised visits, which I ended up in supervised visits, which I'm sure we'll get to. But I stayed in those visits for 8 years, like a hardened criminal. Most women can't do that because it is the most excruciating. And I have to say probably why I survived was because I had such a great upbringing and a lot of self-esteem and a good family behind me. And some of these women don't have that. So they don't make it. And they can't do it financially either. They're broken financially.
There's all these other factors that now come into play in order to make it possible for you to stay engaged. I mean, we're talking lawyers' bills, we're talking, advocate bills, all these different things.
It's unbelievable what you'll go through. Yeah. And it's hard for these women to maintain a job because, you're constantly going to court, number one. And if you're not going to court, you're taking your child to a therapist, or it's just constant. And so a lot of these women can't maintain a job because they just end up getting fired. Right. And if they don't get fired, they've gone through all their money anyway.
Yeah. In the book, you described there was a moment where you talked about what it was like to be a mom, watching her child in pain due to abuse. So I want to read that excerpt, if it's okay. So I felt that there was a hole in my stomach, and it was getting larger. So large that it threatened to eat me up inside. When Amy went back to sleep after her nightmares about her dad, I lay awake with my insides aching, and the hole grew larger and then swirled so fast that I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded, and I experienced severe chest pains as if I were having a heart attack. I told myself not to breathe or move, because if I did, I would probably die. Marilee, I really appreciated that, and it's hitting me hard even right now.
Me too.
This perspective that I think it's really hard to truly understand, what it is like to be a parent who wants to protect their child, and everyone is standing in the way, and that you have to send this little person every day off, to be with someone who is raping them, harming them. And I can only imagine for any mom out there who's listening, what it's like for them. And I'd love for you just to maybe share, what you would want to say to other moms out there who are going through this right now, who might resonate very much with that description of the pain.
Well, that actually, haven't, I don't, I mean, that was written so long ago, and honestly, that really hit me too. That is the exact feeling that I had, and I'm sure that these other mothers have. I used to say, you've been better off killing us than going through what we went through the court system, and then to continue to have to hand over your child to an abuser. There's really nothing worse. I think that a mom's first instinct, I always say this is something I say in a speech, a mother's first instinct is to protect her child, and when the means and power to do this are stripped unjustly from a mother, there are no words to describe the constant heartache that is felt as each day passes by, and that's the same. You can't even imagine. Another mom wrote a poem to lose a child through life, not through death, but through life, and it's a beautiful poem, and what it shows is that it's like a death. And I've had women say to me when I speak at the Battered Mothers Conference, and they'll come in from all across the country, and they'll say, I tell them, I said, look at the mother sitting next to you, and look at her eyes. No, you take a really good look at her eyes, because there's no one that will ever understand this kind of pain but another mother going through it. And you've got to stick together, because all you have is each other, and you are your child's own best advocate. You're the only real advocate that child's going to have is going to be that mother. And so I believe these mothers, I when I get calls, sometimes it's so hard for me to take still, because obviously it takes me into my past somewhat, and I'm trying to get through it and listen to it. And a lot of them are the exact same story. Mm-hmm. But I tell them, at no cost do you give up. If you end up no supervised visits, you stay in them as whatever it takes. It's hell. And you can't give up fighting. And even if you have to go pro se, where they have to represent themselves, I found not all moms can do this either. I'm not saying every mother out there needs to do this, because they can't. But the ones that are strong enough to, when they go in to represent themselves, they know their case better than anybody. And you may not know the law and you get crucified on that area, but at least you have a voice. And that's one thing. Having that voice is huge. And that makes a difference. And I believe I moved my case forward by me representing myself at the end when I had no more money and I was completely bankrupted, because I had a voice. And so I just, I know the heart-wrenching pain is unbearable, and I know they cry themselves to sleep at night. And I had a mom call me recently, had a 4.5-year-old little girl, and that's the same time I lost my little girl. And she was saying, I can't give her back to him. I can't do it. Can you take her? Will you take her? Well, I can't take her. I mean, the FBI would be on me in 2 seconds. What good would that do, Right. But it's like, that's the pain they're going through. They would have anybody take their child rather than have to hand them over to that abuser again. Yeah.
Man, thank you for those words and for that guidance and for that hope. And, that was something that also really stood out to me as I was reading your story, that every so often in in the midst of these chapters where you were describing such difficult times, there would be these little sentences or these little phrases every once in a while, and yet I continued on, or I kept hoping that it was all going to be okay. There was like this internal optimism that you drew on was kind of my feeling about it. And I guess I'm curious about how that optimism is today. How are you doing in the hopefulness?
This is something that I think it's kind of funny that you brought that up. I grew up an optimist. I mean, honestly, I had those rose-colored glasses on. I believed everything was hunky-dory. But it's funny, my daughter is that same kind of optimist, and I find that really strange after what she's been through, but she always looks at the good out there, which shocks me. So I think that optimism just came from who I was. Today, I still am optimistic. I just know, like what I told you, it took them 20 years to listen to domestic violence, and we don't have another 20 years for them to listen to this issue. We are in it. And for social change to happen, it takes a long, long time. I've accepted that. I don't accept the fact that it's continuing on. And whatever little difference I can make, whether it's talking to the head of family courts here in Colorado, whether it's testifying before Congress, whether it's going to the media, whether it's working for Moms Fight Back, which is an organization here in Colorado that we're going to do legislative work, and we're setting up a court watch team, anything I do, everything I do every day, every day that I do is to make a difference in this issue. So that is my optimism. Not that I'm going to be able to change it, because it's going to take a lot. It's going to take, I accept the fact that this is going, I didn't think it was going to take this long for people to pick up on it and grab it. And I really am really upset with the media, because I think the only way to get this out, really get it out, the only time you see change in the world is when the media grasps it. And we really need the media to grasp this to save these children. And I get upset, like, when you read, what was the guy, the Saunders guy that raped the boys, the coach, and then the Catholic priest, how we all got upset about the Catholic priest. But the biggest criminal of all of those, way more than those two, and how upset all the public got over those two issues, is our family court system.
Yeah.
Way more abuse going on, and yet nobody's looking at it.
Yeah. It's an important thing that you're bringing to the table here is this structure of there being this separation, right, between the court system and the criminal justice system, and that in the court system so many things get a pass or are not brought forward in the same way they would be if we were in the criminal justice system. I really appreciate the just the passion that you have and the perspective that, you know, we have to do what we can each day and notch it forward as best we can, you know, and continue collaborating. You know, one of the other things that I heard you say earlier that I love to reiterate is just the support. Like, you know, we have to have support systems in place. And if you're in the midst of going through this yourself and trying to protect your child, you know, reach out to support. I'd love you to say a little bit more about momsfightback.org, as well as your website, marileemclean.com, and what people can expect to find at each of those websites.
Well, Moms Fight Back is really an organization that was brought in to account for the fact that not just dealing with this issue. This is where I work, and I'm the director of outreach for it. So I work on a court watch team and courtroom reform and setting up that kind of thing. But it deals with a lot of issues. It deals with bullying. It deals with, you know, marijuana issues, things that mothers care about. So it's really handling a lot of different approaches. But we will be doing legislative work next year, and that's where I'm going to really take hold for as far as the courtroom reform goes and the Safe Child Act, the Safety of the Child First, and other issues that we need to deal with up front. But as far as Moms Fight Back, it's working a lot of different issues, and it will make a difference. But we really just got started on this possibly about 2 years ago, so it's taking time. So everything takes a lot of time. There's lots of organizations working on this very issue, just this, and I believe, and like I'll say to all of them when I ever speak where we have most of them together, is really we need an umbrella over all those organizations as one to do the same thing, because everybody's going here, and here, and it's not. That is not going to work. We really need to come together as one. So that's my opinion. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you. Yeah. So folks, be sure to check out momsfightback.org. And then tell us a little bit about your website, Marilee McLean. That's MARALEEMCLEAN.com. What resources, what can people expect to find when they visit your website?
Well, you know, it has a lot of my speaking engagements on there, and it has the news releases on PAS, Parental Alienation Syndrome with Richard Gardner, which I did. CNN International News Story. It's about an hour-long program on parental alienation syndrome. And actually, Richard Gardner was in this piece. And for those of you that don't know who Richard Gardner was, he started this theory back in the early 80s. That's why all these women started losing custody. And he would self-publish his book, and he sent it to every court in the nation. And so all these courts started taking on his theory. Well, his theory, I mean, he even states in his own books, and you can pick up his books to find out, it's okay for the pedophile to come out of the closet and choose whom they want to love. It's God's will. And that we need to have more pity for the pedophile than scorn. And it makes little girls and little boys better sexual partners. And anyway, he ended up killing himself, I think about 10 or 11 years ago, stabbing himself in the upper part of his chest. And he committed suicide. but it's not approved by the AMA, American Medical Association, or the American Psychological Association. However, that PAS, parental alienation syndrome, is still being used in our courts, and women are still losing custody because of it. So a lot of my website has the PAS in it. It has the CNN piece, a lot of news coverage, articles that I've written, and my book, of course, to be able to purchase my book or read about my book, and just the information of things that I'm doing out there, trying to make a difference.
Right. Great. Thank you. Yeah, and I really recommend for anybody who's listening that is navigating the court system, is on this, similar journey, to reach out to Marilee via her website, or you can reach her at LEIGH, M as in Mary, CL @hotmail.com. Check out the resources, reach out to her. There's so much just available out there, and I am so glad to know about you. As my Facebook group, Healing from Sexual Abuse, continues to grow, of course, there are many parents in that group who are also not just dealing with their own healing, but are also now parenting a child who's been abused and are navigating very similar issues. So you are such a wonderful resource, and I just thank you. I can't even thank you enough for just what you're doing in this world and the change that you are fighting for to bring about. So thank you so much. It's been such an honor to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your work.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Thanks, Marilee.
Very important.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
Not really. I feel like I hope people out there listening can get involved more on this issue and can, write to senators or congressmen, or look to see what's going on in domestic violence shelters, or what's happening with women that are trying to protect their children, even if they aren't going to a domestic violence shelter, or court watching these cases, because there is no accountability for our family court system. There is no transparency in those courtrooms. Those judges can do whatever they want. There is no, that's the problem. And I really believe that's what needs to happen, is accountability and transparency. And not to think that this can't happen to you, and to understand the ACE study research and what happens with the adverse childhood experiences and the ACEs, and how it affects all of society and the billions of dollars it's costing society. I don't go into the money issue much, because to me this is a huge issue, but I'm not trying to project it out to be the money side of it, because it really needs to stop, not just about the money, but the real reason this is happening. Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Marilee. So, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and for listening today. We really appreciate you being here and joining us. And I want to remind everybody to check out RachelGrantCoaching.com. Pop on over there and check out the additional resources that you can find there for healing from sexual abuse. And I hope you will also take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review if you're enjoying what you're learning and getting to know from this podcast. And be well until next time. Take good care of you, and we'll see you in next month. All right. Bye, everyone.